My name's Quinn Brett. I live in Estes Park, Colorado, and grew up here in Minneapolis. I grew up in New Hope, went to Armstrong High School, and I'm back. In 2017, a little bit of my backstory, I was a climbing ranger in Rocky Mountain National Park and a professional rock climber, and traveled the world and played and put up first ascents and speed records all over the world. And then in 2017, I fell rock climbing in Yosemite National Park. I broke my T12 vertebrae, and that landed me here in a wheelchair as paraplegic. I can't feel anything or move anything pretty much below the waist. I returned to the National Park Service in 2020 in a unique role, a split division role. I was in the Wilderness Division, the Recreation Division, and the Accessibility Division. And I just found through my past experiences previous to my injury and then wanting to recreate now, that fire still in me to play outside, that we were not necessarily providing opportunities for people with disabilities in the same realm that we were providing for everybody else. And stigmas surrounding all of that, of what we're capable of, what technology is, the laws that support people with disabilities. And so I kind of found this niche. And a good friend, Joe Stone, who I met in Washington, D.C., while we were doing some advocacy work out there, we met and left the government and decided to start our own consulting company. So here we are. Also, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to just shout them out. Raise your hand. Interrupt me. Okay, so some things I wanted to talk about today, starting through, we'll go through the laws and policies and standards that support people with disabilities. We'll also talk a little bit about wilderness law, just because that some of us have land management areas. Oh, no, not now, puppy. That wilderness is included in the places that we recreate. Can you be down? Ruby. And then we'll put some trail sign information, federal trail standards, and then sometimes a little bit beyond the standards. And then we'll also cover some mobility devices. So to start off with the boring stuff, there are a few different laws that support people with disabilities. We have the Architectural Barriers Act. This was started in 1968, excuse me. This is one of the first laws that we have for people with disabilities. And this is on the federal land side. This was a law that was passed to say, hey, people need to get into the post office. People need to get into any of the government buildings. It's more of a structural, physical space law. How do we get people into the buildings so they can do the stuff and things in those buildings? In 1973, we realized, well, people are getting into the building, awesome, but the program or the postage stamps are sold upstairs. Or the daycare, for instance, is upstairs. So in 1973, they realized, well, wow, we can get people with physical disabilities into the buildings. But now, how are we providing people with disabilities an opportunity to actually participate in the programs that we provide for everybody else? So in 1973, we passed the Rehabilitation Act. Section 504 says that any programs, this is all federal land stuff still, any program or activity that is provided for people, anybody, has to also be available for people with disabilities. So figuring out that land space, we can get into the building, but now we need to be providing all the stuff and things for people to be participating also. Those are the only two laws that existed for people with disabilities until 1990, when we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is on the city and local government side. So the ADA, we have the ABA, Architectural Barriers Act, and then we have the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this was, yes, ADA has 5 titles. This includes buildings modeled often a lot after the Architectural Barriers Act, because we don't need to repeat the wheel, and a little bit of programs and activities from 504, but it includes all sorts of things from city and local governments to comply with. And then the last law that we'll talk a little bit about today is the Wilderness Act. And in parts because when we talk about mobility devices and recreation and physical mobility, The definitions of wheelchairs were finally provided in 1990 for a recreational space, and that includes in the Wilderness Act. So even though the Wilderness Act is federal, the ABA is federal, the only definition, if you are a federal lands employee, the only reason you would have to look at the ADA is for anything to do with mobility devices, in fact, because they were just tacked on in 1990, realizing, yeah, that wheels are not allowed in wilderness, but we need to address the fact that people who live in wheelchairs should also be allowed in the wilderness. So we'll cover some of those definitions in a little bit. Yeah, so we have your ADA versus the ABA, just a little better overview of what they are. So Title III covers state and local governments, and it prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability, of public accommodations. Things that we're still trying to achieve, like I still have a really hard time, I think I'm like 1 for 7 in renting a car at a U.S. airport and arriving and having it have hand controls for me to actually drive it around. I came here in June, a lovely story about that. I came here in June for a work meeting with a fellow coworker. He's also paralyzed. Hey, Ruby. He's also paralyzed. So 2 of us, we wanted to rent a minivan. I called them, of course, like probably 7 times before I arrived at the Minneapolis airport. They said, yes, we're going to have that vehicle. We arrived. Jason arrived 5 hours earlier than me, so I had him go check in at Hertz. They were like, we never heard of this. We have no idea what to do. So we waited until I arrived at 2 in the afternoon. They said they couldn't get us a rental car till Tuesday. We are 2 working Americans, and so I had them just Uber us around the city, even up to my aunt and uncles, who I was planning to have dinner with on Sunday night, up to Chisago, because I wanted to get around with my day. And still now fighting with Hertz to provide me reimbursement for all of those Hertz rides. So super frustrating as like 2 working individuals. I still couldn't get a vehicle. And the vehicle that they would have given us on Tuesday would have been an SUV, which is difficult for then 2 folks who live in wheelchairs to pile their wheelchairs into the SUV. Minivans work much better because we can open those side doors and pop them in. So little things that we have laws for, but we're still not quite meeting them. And then on the federal land side, the Architectural Barriers Act requires access to facilities that are designed, built, altered, or leased. So a lot of things we have to think about, especially in the outdoor recreation space, is that we get a lot of grants, like land water conservation grant funds for doing activities, building trails, all of that stuff. Where are we getting this funding, and what law are we looking to first, primarily? Because if it is a federal grant, we need to be looking at federal laws. Cool. Okay, again, the Section 504 federally prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities on federally conducted programs. We have to be able to participate. And so I guess my work with returning to the National Park Service and working in the Wilderness Division and Outdoor Recreation Division, I was thinking about, we provide, especially in the National Park Service, we provide an accessible trail in most of our national parks, but they are about a quarter mile long, a half mile long. They're paved or gravel, and they're in their busiest parts of our national parks. Fantastic opportunities that are needed for everyone on the spectrum of experience that we want, but where are we providing a more wilderness type experience, solitude, a recreational, challenging experience? Where are we providing those types of experiences for people with disabilities? And where are we providing, well, I might never be able to go to certain summits and peaks. Are we providing those experiences via soundscapes or whatever it may be that we can think of more creatively to provide the experience that those parks are created for? Why are people coming here to recreate, and how can we give people with disabilities the same, if not a similar experience? Okay, the fun stuff. Definition of a wheelchair, there are 2 definitions. One is for wilderness only, and the other one is just definition of wheelchairs. And there's a little bit of nuance in the language. And we'll dive into like how this language matters in a little bit. So the ADA definition of a wheelchair is a manually operated or battery-driven device designed primarily for use by an individual with a mobility disability for the main purpose of indoor or of both indoor and outdoor locomotion. This is fun, isn't it? When we're thinking about recreation space, which I don't believe many folks were thinking about this when we created these definitions about, we're going to have all this new technology, and exactly what do people with disabilities want? So we have both indoor and outdoor locomotion. This definition is great. But then we move to the wilderness side, and it's a little bit more stringent. Congress reaffirms that nothing in the Wilderness Act prohibits wheelchair use in a wilderness area. And the definition of a wheelchair here is, for the purpose, the term wheelchair means a device designed solely for use by a mobility impaired person for locomotion that is suitable in an indoor pedestrian area. I know. So now we just got a little tighter, and we'll dive into what this means and why. Has anyone had any wilderness training at all? Like, yeah, okay, cool. We're going to talk about this. So we can read all of these definitions on paper. You can look at that device that I am using right there, my off-road hand cycle, and one could say, if you didn't see that picture, if you just thought about that device, one could potentially think, well, that doesn't look like it's suitable in an indoor pedestrian area. And I would encourage you to ask, well, why not? It looks a little bit different. Your steel-toed boots, were they made for an indoor pedestrian area? No, but they're suitable in an indoor pedestrian area. So are we making assumptions? So a lot of people get scared when they see these different mobility devices because they have mountain bike type tread, or they have wider wheels. I am a wider wheelbase. What kind of assumptions are we making and thinking about? God, I wish I could show this little video. I just remembered. Oh well. What kind of assumptions are we making about like how we are trammeling the land, or what kind of mark we are leaving on the land? Thinking about those instead of just jumping to, oftentimes when I'm on trail, I would say every time I'm out on trail, I get stopped in some way, either in a positive way of saying, it's rad that you're out here, or you're not allowed to be here, rather than coming with a curious lens of, hey, what is this thing? And why would you possibly be here? So the nitty-gritty of definitions, it does matter. And for everyone's sake, these hand cycles, these off-road mobility devices, they range from $4,000 to $20,000. Quite expensive. So if you're lucky to have one of them, you're super lucky. But also, probably it's only likely that you only have one. And just our legs don't work. And so these devices cover a lot of things for us. They are my legs for walking, but they also it's my bike for biking. It's something that I use. I have a tendency to get out of my wheelchair whenever, even if I were going to go on this little lake path out front here, I would prefer to get into my hand cycle. For a variety of reasons, it gets me off my butt, which I have a lot of concerns about. I'm sitting all day, every day for the last 7 years of pressure sores. So getting my body in a different position, stretching my hips, using my arms in a different way, just different opportunities, changing my shoes is super important for me in a health, but also in a mental scape. So remembering that we have, if I was to be always in my manual wheelchair that we have here, it's like my flip-flops. I'm always wandering around in my flip-flops, and that's not the most fun all of the time. Okay, so I want to dive into this definition just a little bit further of the wilderness one, and we're going to stick with this one just because it's so strict. So it's designed solely for use by a mobility impaired person for locomotion. So if we just took a second, if we see people on trails using an odd wheeled device, maybe we could look at it just for a second before bothering the person and being like, she's pedaling with her arms. Seems like it's married. That's not the most desirable thing. Or sometimes I've had people on trail say, ooh, I want one. I'm like, well, it's more fun to walk, I think. But why are they designed? And you can easily look, if you're a land manager, we can always ask the person, instead of accosting the person with a mobility device then and there, you could just ask some more questions like, hey, what is that thing? Who makes it? La, la, la. And then go back to your office and Google it up and do a little further digging about what kind of device it might be and what is it made for. And then that's suitable for use in an indoor pedestrian area. As we dive more into the Wilderness Act, I will tell you why, what this definition was, the purpose of it contextually was in only in relationship to the Wilderness Act. And then, of course, we have all of these e-bikes and battery-powered things. And so is the device battery-powered? There are a lot of land managers, agencies out there. I would say particularly Forest Service has the most difficult time with this definition, and they're saying that anything that is a mobility device that has a battery is a motor vehicle. At this time, that is what their CFR says, which is unfortunate in understanding that disability laws are kind of in a different swimming pool from e-bike laws and restrictions of that way. So this definition does say battery-powered or manually powered. So we're not e-bikes, we are a mobility device with a battery-powered e-assist. And so understanding that definition and understanding that there are a whole bunch of nuances with that, and we do have two-wheeled e-bikes that lots of people with disabilities use. Yes, I guess a further clarification. So if it's an electrically powered wheelchair, it's not an e-bike. And all other devices, like two-wheeled e-bikes, segways, golf carts, anything that was not made for a person with a mobility disability, but is used by people with disabilities, goes under this different category called Other Power-Driven Mobility Devices, OPDMDs they're called. So an OPDMD, this is another Department of Justice, revised their regulations in 2010. So this is, again, any mobility device powered by batteries, fuel, or engines that are not primarily designed for individuals with mobility disabilities, but are used. So this is where you see a lot of people using segways, see a lot of folks using golf carts, and of course there are even people with mobility disabilities that use two-wheeled e-bikes. And this is understanding a little bit about disability. So I have a T. I'm going to use you, Mason, because you're right up here, and it's perfect. I am paralyzed T12, so I fractured my last thoracic vertebrae, shattered it, which means I'm a T12 complete injury. I have no movement or sensation from my belly button down. But Mason, on the other hand,
I am incomplete. So I have some movement and sensory motor function in my legs, but Quinn and I are the same level. So, yeah.
I like to call Mason a cheater because Mason, because of that, because of being incomplete, he has a little bit of quad muscle firing and other leg muscles firing, so he can, he gets it's spasticity. But again, if you have that level of function and you have enough balance, you could ride a two-wheeled e-bike. It's going to be a lot cheaper than buying a $20,000 hand cycle.
No, I don't.
And also, it's going to be a lot convenient for you. Like whatever muscle function that Mason has, that ability to stand up is huge for secondary issues with spinal cord injury in particular. The ability to stand up and get off your butt. And so if you could just buy a two-wheeled e-bike and help maintain a little bit more leg muscle to be functional around the world and save yourself from secondary health issues, you should absolutely do that. And so just keeping that in mind when we have disabilities that we're on along a spectrum. So you see Mason using a wheelchair and then you see him cheating a couple minutes later from now. He's not cheating, he's just trying to use his muscles to the best ability that he can and keeping himself healthy and sane. So all that to say, OPDMDs, if Mason were to come to our public lands, and even if it's a place that says no e-bikes, as a person with a disability, Mason is allowed to ask, and most likely you guys should be going through this these 5 considerations of why you would not allow Mason to be on your land. The purpose of these laws, again, is to support people with disabilities, not just be straight out denying them. So we're trying to provide a way of, okay, well, Mason's asking to use this two-wheeled e-bike. What about, if we're concerned about speed? Sweet, we can say something, but hey, Mason, you can't go over 20 miles an hour. But that means you also need a blanket statement, put that on your whole entire trail system. You can't just restrict Mason from going too fast because you're concerned now that he has an e-bike that he's going to be irresponsible and he's got bad decision making. He might. But if we're going to put a blanket if we're going to we can't put a rule or a regulation on the person with a disability. It has to be a blanket statement. So just thinking about that too. If we're thinking it's going to be unsafe, like I told a story of the Twin Cities Marathon yesterday, I came here early in October and hand cycled the Twin Cities Marathon after a 4-year battle of trying to get hand cycles allowed, different mobilities allowed, mobility devices allowed, other than just racing wheelchairs, the racing elite Paralympic class. I just wanted to hand cycle it and run alongside my cousin. But it took 4 years because they were worried I was going to roll over all 10,000 runners' toes, which is kind of unreasonable. And there are easy ways to mitigate things like that. So if you are concerned about speed or other people, all of those things, like we can cone half the road, or we can easily do things to mitigate things that we're fearful of. So here are your 5 considerations for OPDMDs. And again, this is devices that were not made for people with disabilities, segways, e-bikes, any of that kind of stuff, but are often used for people with mobility disabilities. Again, we talked about this a little bit. So the importance of the ABA, ADA, where are you getting your funding? As you've realized, hopefully by now, that the ABA, federal lands, we don't really talk about anything with mobility devices at all. So while there are these 2 different laws, and they're kind of segregated of who's supposed to look at what, it is best for all of us to just cross-reference them both, because there's information in both laws that are really helpful. And legally speaking, because it is written down somewhere, even if that's not your law that you're supposed to be primarily listening to, it would be precedence to have it look at it in another realm, knowing that, well, there's this law that exists there. We should be cross-referencing that, and that's probably your best guidance. Yeah, so are we providing in our outdoor recreation spaces, are we providing equal opportunities for people with disabilities, or are we getting hung up on the stigmas and stereotypes and personal opinions, of which we have a lot of, but always looking back to law for the guidance, and remembering that these laws are supporting people with disabilities, that we have enough to go through in our day-to-day lives, and to go through more further hoops and things that kind of can be even more tiresome. I tell a story of Moab, for instance, in Moab, Utah. They are trying to manage the e-bike thing. And it said, hey, if you are a person with a mobility disability, why don't you come to us, to our office, call us, stop by, and we'll give you a little sticker, and you can put it on your hand cycle or whatever that is. And their hope was that by putting this little sticker on, it would keep the conflict of the user groups down. So that way, when I'm out, somebody isn't accosting me and looking, and I can show them my little sticker or my little card. But that still takes a minute. It's more effort for me to stop into the office and call. And then while I'm out on trail, is somebody legitimately going to actually stop and want to listen to me and have a conversation? If you're hardcore about wheels shouldn't be allowed in wilderness, unlikely that you're going to actually wait for me to pull out of my little backpack my little slip of paper that says, I am allowed to be here. So they noticed, Moab, Utah, BLM noticed that it wasn't really reducing any conflict. And so it was just creating a more burden on the people with disabilities. So let's just stop it. It doesn't mean that's the perfect answer of, is that something you should do or shouldn't do? Think about that in your areas, I suppose, if there is a lot of user conflict. I'm finding that the more information that we can give by putting it on our websites or putting it on trailhead information, that people with disabilities are here also, or that e-bikes, you might see e-bikes for people with disabilities. And of course, they're always going to be the butthead that doesn't have a disability and is using the e-bike. But we can't deny people with disabilities because we're fearful of the butthead that's going to cut the trail or use the e-bike or whatever it is. Okay, so the Wilderness Act was established in 1964. And this was established in the National Wilderness Preservation System. Golly, yes, how many acres do we have? 44 states and 806. Oh, golly, 111 million acres of wilderness. And we have characters of wilderness. We have 5 characters of wilderness. We have an untrammeled quality, a natural quality, an undeveloped quality, outstanding opportunities for solitude and primitive unconfined recreation, and of course the lovely blanket statement 5, other features of value. So when we're thinking about the context of the wilderness definition of wheelchairs in wilderness, that's suitable in an indoor pedestrian area, After I was doing this work for a while, it finally dawned on me, like 3 years in, that I was like, well, the whole point of that definition is specifically in context to wilderness. It's not about whether or not this device is necessarily suitable indoors. It is it suitable in keeping with the characters and preservation of the qualities of the 5 characters of wilderness? So things that have similarities, well, in an indoor pedestrian area, we don't really want things that could scuff up the floor, leave huge giant marks, potholes, all of that stuff. Same with a wilderness place. Like, we don't want to be trammeling the land, leaving potholes, all of those kinds of things. So the definition was thinking in context of the wilderness of what are we trying to preserve. Combustible engines wouldn't be suitable in an indoor pedestrian area. Neither are they suitable outdoor in a wilderness area. Loud noised things wouldn't be suitable in an indoor pedestrian area. Definitely would be ruining that natural and solitude experience in a wilderness area. So thinking about, well, we have all this new technology of mobility devices, and we could look at the indoor space and say, well, it's not suitable indoors. Well, let's think about, okay, well, it might look funny indoors because we have all this new awesome technology, but how does it act in wilderness, and what is it providing for people with disabilities to actually get to those wilderness places? And are we still keeping in line with wilderness character? Are we still keeping it quiet, not trammeling the land, being respectful in that way? Yeah, so just further here. How is it operated? Is it propelled with the arms? Does it have a battery? And how is it moving about the terrain? And again, the noise disturbances, gas-powered, damaging. I would argue a lot of folks, like a lot of these hand cycles, they are 28 to 36 inches wide. And our trails on federal lands, legally speaking, should be made to be 36 inches wide. And there's been a few arguments of folks saying that I'm wider than the trail. True. Am I trammeling the land? Am I any more damaged than the tour bus of tourists that just dropped off and are walking 7 feet wide on the trail? And that happens on a daily basis, whereas me with my hand cycle or any of my community members, maybe you see us once a month. What is that doing to the land legitimately? Again, with the battery powered and just understanding disability, so you might see a wide range of people who are able to walk, but they can't balance very well. Or the battery powered, for instance, I have strong arms, but my Dovetail business partner, consulting partner, Joe, he's a C7 quadriplegic. So his left hand, his arms are fully functioning. His left hand does not work at all. It just remains in an open stance. And his right arm works fully. His hand, okay. He always says it's easier to open a pickle jar than it is to open a Coke bottle. So he has some grasp in his hand. And Joe chooses to use a manual wheelchair because, again, like, he can be more physically active. He can get into more places. A manual wheelchair weighs 15 to 50 pounds, whereas a power wheelchair, if you're a higher level quadriplegic, those weigh 350 pounds. And so also thinking about that in terms of context with wilderness, a lot of people see these hand cycles that I'll show you a little video of and assume that they're super heavy. Well, horses are allowed in wilderness, and how much do those suckers weigh? A lot. Yeah, a lot. And thinking about it, I weigh about 115 pounds. My hand cycle, one of them weighs 100 pounds, so I'm still only 200 pounds. That's still less than a typical everyday average manual or battery-powered wheelchair, what Christopher Reeve was using every day. So just being weary of what kind of stigmas are we putting on folks. Yeah, and that we have the ability to sweat. A battery-powered Joe doesn't sweat. And so that battery-powered, before any of this e-assist equipment came out, Joe had a regular old hand cycle, and he would push it everywhere he could to get his exercise, but he was only recreating early in the morning. He had to get up between 5 and 7 and go out recreating because when it got to be summertime, heat of the day, can't sweat, can't exercise, not good. He's going to pass out, not great. So also thinking about, what kind of devices, what kind of things are these devices providing for us? So as far as it goes with wilderness character and recreational opportunities, it's a balancing act. We have 2 different laws, the Wilderness Act saying we need to preserve and conserve, but we also have accessibility laws saying wheels are allowed in wilderness and people with disabilities should also be recreating in these spaces. Ooh, yay, mobility devices. My partner Joe made a fun little video. I think it's coming up here in a second. I'll have you click on it. And I can walk you through. I have a whole bunch of slides also, but this little video he made is a cool compilation of just showing like all the new age equipment that's out there, and the places that it goes, and hopefully giving you guys a good visual of, where these things can go. But yes, while I'm biking with my hand cycle, sure, I could mob down a trail at upwards of 20 miles an hour. But I'm also a human being with a little bit of a brain up here. And when I'm on a hiking trail, I know that I should be going hiking paces. And so just seeing these devices and how they operate and where they can go. And also, if you were to take the time to Google some of these devices as a land manager, perhaps, and understanding that, like, Minnesota's got a lot of them. The tank action track chairs. Totally, that's one that gets a whole lot of stigmas because I think there's a video of it. It's got these huge tank type treads, but they're not any worse than my mountain bike type treads. And if you look at it, it looks like it could go everywhere. It can go some good places at about 4 miles an hour. It's really great. It was invented for people mostly for ranching and hunting. And so it has some fantastic purposes for like fly fishing, getting yourself along close to the river, and then it can stand you up, and then you can actually cast and not be sitting down. So it provides amazing opportunity, but just understanding, like, when you look at it, you could get fearful of like, oh man, that could ruin all the things. But really, like, where is it capable of going, and what is that person trying to get to go to do? And then language matters. So often people with disabilities, I would say you don't have to be uncomfortable with saying it's a person with a disability, using the word disability, accessibility. There are some more outdated terms. It's okay if you still use them, like handicapped. People prefer these days the more new age nomenclature is just to say like accessible parking, accessible bathroom, just an accessible thing. And if you're afraid of talking to me because you don't know how to approach me or how to call me, you can just say, hey, Mason, how do you prefer to be talked to?
Like a normal person.
And same with, like, if, sometimes I have super tall friends, 6'4", and they're like, would you prefer if I kneel down next to you? And I'm like, yeah, sometimes that's lovely because I'm tired of craning my neck. So just asking questions, and don't be afraid to ask the questions. We prefer it, and it just makes the scene a whole lot more comfortable. And then as far as mobility device language, you'll hear a lot of us in the community call these devices a whole bunch of things. Not as many folks are as educated in the laws as I happen to be, so most of my community will call them their bikes when they're using for biking. I happen to call them mobility devices everywhere I go because that language matters, especially on our public lands and where we're recreating. But knowing that you might hear manual wheelchairs, off-road wheelchairs, all-terrain wheelchairs, trikes, adaptive mountain bike, all okay to use, but there's a whole bunch of ways that these things can be called. Cool, we'll go into the video. I don't know. Oh, this is the first one. Okay. This is just a good example of like some of the times what happens on trail.
This is a handicapped piece of equipment. And what? Show me the rules saying that you're allowed to do this. Your shoes? Who are you? Come on, buddy. You're breaking the rules at the park. It's a handicapped piece of equipment. I can't walk. You should have led with that. I said it. Is this your husband? Class act, brother. You're a class act. You guys are a class act. You know the rules. Class act. You're to be there. Yeah, dude. Wow. Class act.
Just one example. This was like made kind of popular on social media that this happened. My little snuggle bug. Like if we just would have led with curiosity, like I had a similar example in the Flathead Lake this summer. A friend went through this whole process of getting my coworker Jason and I out on Flathead Lake in Montana. He sailed us to this island in the middle of Flathead Lake. We slept on the sailboat, and the next morning he surprised us by having another set of friends come in with a powerboat with our hand cycles, and they dropped our 2 hand cycles off, Jason and my hand cycles off, at the island in the middle of Flathead Lake. And then Jason and I got dropped off and piggybacked and put on our hand cycles. And then Jason and I hand cycled around the island for like 3 hours by ourselves. Like, so awesome. And then when Jason and I got back to the shore, we had planned to rendezvous with our boat friend at about noon. As we were getting on the shore, a ranger came up on his boat, and he led with, "Those aren't allowed here." I never got his name. I never got like what his job was working for the state park. But he just said, "Those aren't allowed here." And of course I said, "Well, you're kind of messing with the wrong person. This is my job. I can tell you the definition of a wheelchair, and these are our devices for hiking." And he was like, "Well, you're going to scare the wildlife." Again, anyone could legitimately scare the wildlife, and we've been outside a lot, and we kind of know, like, sure, we might startle a deer or horses if there are horses out there. Like, we, the people with the disability and the lived experience, kind of know how to navigate and walk through this. And so just understanding that if he would have approached and said, "Hey, good morning, what are these unique looking things?" I could have told him, and then I could have found out his name, and then we could have had a just much better, easier conversation rather than, "Are you changing this stuff for me, little puppy?" Okay. Let's go past that one. Okay, this one.
As an able-bodied person, we know what we feel when we go out in the environment, and you know what you felt, and to know that you still get to enjoy that in some capacity, and maybe it needs to be a wider capacity. I just appreciate this class for this awareness. So thank you.
Yeah, all that to say, exactly. Like these pieces of equipment, these mobility devices are historically creating access in places that we've people with disabilities have never gone before. Last October for my 6-year anniversary, I did the rim to rim of the Grand Canyon in my hand cycle. How cool is that? Yeah. And so just understanding that like historically for the longest time, until about 10 years ago, we've only had flip-flops to wear and been told you're allowed to go in indoor pedestrian places and thinking about maybe on the pavement and maybe gravel roads or gravel paths. But now to see all of these different pieces of equipment and what they're providing for people, yeah, and that the health and mental benefits that it comes from it, yeah. Yep, that's a great question. So there's a few different organizations out there that have been started because of the cost of equipment. So you can look up like the High Fives Foundation, the Kelly Brush Foundation, Challenged Athletes Foundation, Travis Roy Foundation. There's a whole bunch of foundations that have started for people like Mason and myself. Mason and I both have spinal cord injuries, so these foundations are often spinal cord injury related, but if you have cerebral palsy, your disability might have its own foundation to help you submit for a grant and can get a good amount of the cost of this equipment provided. But also on our public lands, one of the things that I was working with the national parks was trying to create partnerships with Rocky Mountain National Park, for instance. The Conservancy, I had a lady whose son died of a very specific neurodegenerative disease, and he had a mobility device. And she's like, hey, I want to donate to you, Quinn. And I was like, well, in fact, let's donate to the Rocky Mountain Conservancy, the conservancy that's partnered with Rocky Mountain National Park. And that way you can get a little tax benefit from it, but also then let's work with the Estes Park Mountain Shop, the local bike shop. They said, yeah, absolutely, we will house and maintain these pieces of equipment. So it was a three-way partnership. And then I worked with the Estes Park Mountain Shop to put on their website. They have like bike rentals, ski rentals. How about adaptive equipment rentals? It's just donation-based. And since then, we've acquired, I think, 4 or 5 different mobility devices. And different national parks are doing that, like Sleeping Bear, Great Sand Dunes, working with their local partnerships. Minnesota, the state here, has been working. Yep. So if we can, because there's a lot of barriers to this equipment, the cost of it, but also traveling with it. Like I drove here from Colorado. I knew I was going to be here for the Twin Cities Marathon, and I had this conference. So I've been living back in Minnesota for the last month. But in part, a lot of that was like, I want to drive so I can have my mobility device. And I don't trust the airlines, honestly, to fly with these $2,000 a piece of equipment. I flew to Madrid with one of my hand cycles, and I lost a $600 battery because they told me it was hazardous and they wouldn't let me fly home with it. That's not the greatest. So yes, how can we create partnerships to provide more of these opportunities for people with disabilities? And little things like I was talking with Eric Larson, who has Northland Adaptive, like it is, and it can be a concern about liability of renting these pieces of equipment or just loaning them out, because there's a lot that goes on there. We need to programmatically have people or volunteers available who know how to work with people with disabilities, provide like different cushioning and seating comfort things, because again, disability is nuanced. You're probably going to buy the larger piece of equipment so it can accommodate more people, but now you have a kid and we need to put a lot of padding in on the side so the kid can actually sit comfortably, like a nice squeezed in ski boot kind of thought. But do you have the staff that is knowledgeable of how to work with people and families with disabilities? So there's a lot that goes on into it. And then are you trusting of the person with a disability to use your equipment? There's a lot of things there, but I think if we can work through a lot of those components of providing people with disabilities more opportunity, that's amazing. I'd love to take some questions.
Well, I'm up front, so I'll just be the noisy one. I just want to commend you for the mouthpiece that you have become. I mean, working in the federal government as an able-bodied person, and then to be on the other side now of seeing the barriers that individuals that have similar situations as yours, and the hard times that you face, even though you've been within the government for so long. And I commend you for continuing to have faith and continuing to keep your positive attitude and to recognize what you can do and what you are able to do and not get eaten up. You too, Mason, I'm sure. It's easy for us and in our own heads, like last night's podcast, it's like we can be so confused in our own heads, but we go to the level 3 fun. and yet at the end of the day, I just commend you for being the spirit that you are and having the voice that you are and being here today and educating us on this sensitive topic. And you are very real about it and approachable. So kudos to you.
You're supposed to ask a question.
It wasn't a question. It was just I wanted to.
No, thank you. But it takes all of you in the room understanding. So that was partly, I told this last night, of why I left the government. Was in part, I was in a 3-division role, which meant I had 3 supervisors. Fantastic. I'm doing this fantastic work. How awesome to find this purpose again and like be elevating it again. But 2 of my supervisors were very much about, yeah, absolutely, Quinn, you should go to parks. You need to talk to the folks. And my 3rd supervisor was like, no, we just create guidance white papers and we distribute them to parks and then they read them. It's like, nobody's going to create this like lovely little handbook that I created on what mobility devices are, and it's going to sit in the back office somewhere. And nobody's actually going to understand how people with mobility devices move around and what they're actually capable of without this dialogue.
Well, and the other thing, too, is that you have the legislators that are sitting up in their offices elsewhere that have never experienced exactly what you've experienced, that are writing the laws. That's what is such a travesty. I mean, they didn't ask you. They just wrote the law.
No, and that's why I was mentioned last night, and I know a lot of you, not everyone was at the podcast last night, but it was mentioned of Connor really does his work and he likes to be on the ground. And same, I really love being on the ground, but I have a tendency to also know the top end and have relationships in the top end of having done some advocacy work and lobbying work in DC. And I think it's very important also to be on the top end. Like the Explore Act is coming out. Hopefully we pass this Explore Act, and it's about, there's a section in there that I helped consult on about adaptive equipment and adaptive trail information. And of course, it went from being an adaptive trail information, which is a law. I didn't put it up here, but there's a law that says all trails should have trail sign information, and it should include 5 things. Instead of rating trails now easy, medium, hard, they should have 5 objective pieces of information. What is the length of the trail? What is the maximum and typical running slope? What is the maximum and typical cross slope? What is the minimum and typical width? And then what is the surface type of that trail? Super easy, typical stuff. But that law, the Explore Act that I consulted on, because it went through so many iterations, it was awesome, was adaptive trails, talking about people with disabilities. Let's go measure the trails and just provide that objective trail information. Land managers got scared and scared and scared and scared. And now in the Explore Act, what is written is that they're mandating 2 more accessible trails in our national parks, our forest lands, our BLM, and our U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Neat. But not the point.
No.
I don't want another 1/4-mile long trail. We want more recreational experiences, and that trail information allows all users, myself, yourself, to make good, informed decisions about which trail experience they would like to have.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more about why that objective information is so important for us with our mobility devices?
Yeah, Mason asked, why is that objective information so important for us? Right, so our mobility devices range from 20 inches wide to 36.5 inches wide. And so that width of the trail, for instance, is super huge. Cross slope is, I would say width and cross slope are the biggest indicators for people with mobility disabilities, because we are in these 4- or 3-wheeled things. As the cross slope increases from left to right, now I'm falling down that hillside that the trail is carved in on. And so knowing that information is super important.
You make an informed decision.
Yeah, and sure, that cross slope might be kind of high, but then I'm not going to go by myself. I'm going to bring 2 friends to hike along with me, and then they can spot me, and it's like a little more of an adventure. Yeah, we have one way in the back. Green shirt.
Has there been any, so with the legislative effort, you didn't get much traction with the trail information. Has there been any effort with Dovetail, Strava, organizations?
That's a really good question. Yes, there's been lots of conversations with Gaia, Strava, all of them. Like Joe and I have had them in the National Park Service. I was talking with USGS. The problem is LiDAR and drone can get that information, but specifically the cross slope to the specificities that we need and what's required by law, that minimum and typical, you can't quite get with that. So on the back end side, we don't have that information yet. And so I've just been working with like USGS, GIS to say, hey, even in the back end of your computer, like while we don't have this information yet, like just put in 5 things that maybe 20 years from now, somebody's finally like, what are these like 5 spaces left open? Maybe we should try to acquire that information. And slowly but surely we have been. Like there are different entities, like certain national parks have been tried. The state of New Jersey, Joe and I are headed there in May to assess 70 miles of trail for that specific purpose. And so these assessments are coming along. And sure, when I was in the National Park Service, my supervisor was like, well, Quinn, we have 21,000 miles of trail. We're never going to do it. Well, how do we eat an elephant? Like, we got to start somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So one of the reasons why 3 national parks, right before I left, we got a grant with the VA, Veterans Affairs, and it was for Delaware Water Gap, Grand Canyon, and Mount Rainier to start measuring their trails. Yep. Way in blue.
Okay, thanks. Given that you spent quite a bit of time today defining terms, right? You're educating and really trying to bring people into the world that you're living. What would you have rather talk about? If we all had the baseline.
Oh, like I would have loved to have talked. That's a really good question. Thanks for asking that. Like I would have loved for it to have been more question answer based, and like y'all tell me, hey, we have these trails. What do you think? Like let's talk about the experiences that we could. Now you know the baseline, but now how can we start providing these experiences? Yeah.
I work with preschoolers, so 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, in a micro business. It's just me. And inclusion is one of the highest priorities of our programming. And I've worked with several students with mobility disabilities. And I feel like providing that access and that opportunity at a young age for every child is just what we need. And as a very small business that can only work with so many children in a year, I feel that limit or that barrier. But what are ways that I can connect families with this information and this access so that as their children are growing in their wilderness experiences at a young age, that they continue to foster it and prioritize it?
Yeah, I would try to connect them with, like, if you have a local adaptive sports organization, or Move United is a national sports organization that is doing a lot of this work too. Just connecting with them, or myself and Joe at Dovetail Trails. Like, yeah, we're huge advocates for this stuff. So just, yeah, and showing them little videos. Like, there's tons of little videos that Joe and I have both of doing adaptive biking or the Grand Canyon. There's little movies like that. Just showing them visuals of, look at, yeah, people with disabilities can do rad stuff too.
Northland Adaptive, obviously, as well. I mean, you're probably
Yeah, we got that. But like you said, representation matters. Like, and being around adults and role models is definitely key.
Mason lives here. Have him hook up with, play with Mason.
Another big thing too, not just me, I'm happy to, but connecting people on social media. I have a lot of parents reach out to me and say, I watch your videos with my kid, and they, realize the things that they're going to be able to do in their future that they didn't think they would be able to. And those are like the best messages that I ever get, and that's why I keep all my stuff family friendly. And yeah, I just, those really, so that too,
We'll do one more, and then I'm happy to answer questions after we're done.
Hi, thanks. I work for the state parks, and we're about to buy a lot more equipment. And you nailed a lot of the things. We have fear. We got to make sure our staff know what to do with it, how to work with it. We're worried that like one of the fears I have is like I'm going to buy this complex piece of equipment and put somebody in it that doesn't know how to use it, and then say, "Have fun." And that complex piece of equipment is this great thing for independent exploration of the trails. What would we get though? Like, do we go with the most complex? Do we go with something simpler? Because we brought the track chair. That's not complex. Easy to use.
It's okay to use, yeah. And there's a lot. They're not as complex as often as you think. And that's not to toot our own Dovetail Trail Consulting horn, but that's something we do too. Is like teach you how to build a program base and come help you figure out what equipment is the best for you. But yeah, it's not as complicated as we'd like to think. And also, how can we, as I was mentioning earlier, how can we have, I don't know, Eric Larson and I were talking about it the other day, like how can we create like a vetting system? Like people arrive and they just want to use your equipment, like, okay, show me a video of you recreating somewhere else on this exact thing. Okay, you know how to use it. You've done it before. Just to ease your mind of knowing, like, okay, these people they do know what they're doing, but also training your staff. So it's consistent in that way of training your staff. If they are come and go and they're seasonal, making sure that you have a good base for training your staff of how to maintain this equipment, but also work with people with disabilities. Cool. I'm happy to answer more afterwards, but I think that's it. Thank you for coming very much.